Hello and welcome to the FPS Review. I am David Schroth, your host for today, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Lian DK-05FX computer desk / case. We're going to start off with unboxing the box as it came in from the shipping company and take a look at what's inside. We went ahead and put it together. The box consisted of 3 pieces in total, the 2 legs for the desk, and then the main desk surface area, as well as a glass top that fit on top of it. We put it all together and got it working so we could move on and start building our system. The first thing we noticed is that there were some LED strips that were taped onto the inside. These are RGB LED strips, and there should be a total of 66 LEDs throughout the strips that will help us as we work on customizing the look and feel of the desk to make sure that we can control it through our motherboard and also address all the different RGBs. They have adhesive on the back, and they should be easy to install once we get the systems put on the inside. First off, one of the wires that we connected when we were putting the unit together was related to the power lift, which allows the desk to go from a sitting to a standing position or to any other height that you can configure. So that wiring had to get hooked up, and we'll show you a little bit of that in a moment. But meanwhile, we're going to start unbundling the different wires that's going to go on to the left-hand side, which would be for the secondary system for this case. And here's the wire that I mentioned. This is the one where there's a couple of wires that have to be connected to make sure that the power legs will work to allow the desk to raise up and down. Next up, we're going to take a look at where the 8 fans that come configured are actually housed. All 8 of the fans have been pre-wired into a fan controller that sits under this metal shroud that we're unscrewing right now. So as you can see, all 8 of them go straight into this fan controller shroud and unit, and then that wiring goes off to the side of the desk on the right-hand side where there's a fan controller where we can actually select the speed for these particular fans from the front of the case. Now, this might make more sense to allow us to control these from a motherboard or from a system or in an automated fashion, but for now we're just going to leave them as is and see how the noise is once we get the system turned on. So we're going to start by getting the power supply installed. The power supply has a collar that we can remove that allows us to quickly install the power supply on the collar and then place the collar back into the system. One of the things that we noticed, even though on the back side all of the screws are thumb screws and should be able to be done with hand force, well, we weren't quite able to do that because they were screwed a little bit too tight, so we had to get a screwdriver to help us out just a little bit. So you'll see as we kind of unscrew the collar, out comes the collar, hopefully. And then that's what we will attach to our power supply and then put it right back in. power supply we're going to be using on the left-hand side is the Seasonic Focus Platinum 750PX. power supply. It's a fully modular power supply, and it's rated at 80 plus platinum levels. It tests pretty well. It's a very solid power supply, and it should work just fine for it. As you can see, there's a bunch of modular cables we already attached. We have one of the PCIe cables. We have a couple of the CPU cables, as well as the ATX 24-pin header. Of course, we need one more ATX pin header, so we're going to go ahead and add that just so we have everything in place, so we don't have to stuff our hands back in the backside and have to add a couple more cables. So as you can see, there's a single 120 millimeter fan on this power supply, and it's more of like the classic smaller size traditional power supply, so it's fairly squarish in dimensions. Which you'll see with some of the newer power supplies that are out there, they kind of turn rectangular and get a bit deeper. This one is kind of the traditional power supply form factor. Now, as you can see, Lian Li was kind enough to include kind of a screw carrier case that includes all of the different screws that we're going to need in order to put this together and sorts them into different things. That was quite a nice touch, so that we don't have to worry about finding the right things to put into the right place. So let's watch as we get the power supply installed. Moving on to installing the motherboard and the processor, we have selected the MSI Meg Unify X570 motherboard, which we have previously reviewed on TheFPSReview.com. We'll drop a link to the review in the description below. And we're also going to use the AMD R9 3950X CPU, which is basically the highest end desktop processor that you can buy today, with 16 cores, 32 threads of power. It absolutely obliterates everything in the desktop space right now. So we'll put those boxes there for you to take a look at those. Then we're going to move on to pulling the motherboard tray out of it. Now, the Lian Li DK-05F has two removable motherboard trays. We're going to go ahead and remove the one on the left. And we found that they've been secured by about 8 different thumb screws, 6 on the back and then 2 towards the front, attaching it to the bottom right there towards the front of the screen. So we're going to work through these, get it unattached, and then we'll move on to installing the motherboard. Now that we have the motherboard tray out, we're going to go ahead and let's take a quick look at the motherboard and look at some of its key features. So the MSI X570 Unify, we have the 3950X processor installed. It also has room for 3 M2 serial ATA drives. We've also placed 32 gigs of G.SKILL memory on board as well. This is the DDR4 3600 speed Cas16 memory, which should do quite well for us as our secondary system. So next up, we'll get it strapped down and bolted onto the motherboard tray, and then we'll move on to the next step of our project. So now it's time to get the system settled in. Let's get the motherboard tray placed on down where it needs to go. But first, we're going to route some of the power cables so that we can have a nice clean appearance once we're done. So as you can see, there's a couple of the rubber grommets right there to the next, basically right behind the motherboard. So we're going to go ahead and put the ATX 24-pin header right on through that, and then we'll throw the PCIe headers through that as well for the graphics card that we'll be doing as installing later. Then underneath, we're going to route the two 8-pin 12-volt ATX headers across through so that we don't have to run them on top of the board. We can just run them underneath. Now we're just simply putting it back, and we're going to make sure that all the power wires are where they need to be, and then we're going to reattach the 8 thumb screws that we had detached to get that out. Next up, we're going to get the cooling installed. We're using the Enermax LIQTECH 2 360mm all-in-one CPU cooler, which we have also previously reviewed on the FPS review. This cooler was actually able to tame a 500 watt power load that was coming off of our Xeon 10980 Extreme Edition processor. So if you take a look, it's got a pretty large water block. The water block actually has the pump already integrated to it, and it's a dual chamber design in there. It has a copper cold plate that helps to increase the rate of heat transfer, and it sports 320mm fans to help cool the 360mm radiator. Now on the back side, you'll see that we've got nice dense fins, and then there's also the rubber grommets kind of along the line, so that as we attach this to whatever we're attaching it to, the rubber grommets will help us keep all the vibrations and any noise down to a minimum. Now within the bottom of the case, you'll see that there's two 360mm sized brackets that we can pull out. We initially discovered that there's just 2 thumb screws that you can use to get them loose, but of course we noticed, hey, there's screws in the back. So we went back there and unscrewed those as well and pulled it on out. Alright, now that we have the bracket out, we can finally get the attachment to happen. So what we'll do here is we'll figure out, well, which way do we want everything to face? Is that going to work? Alright, let's flip it over, and then let's get some screws attached so that the bracket and the radiator can become one, and then we'll get it right back in where it came from. As I mentioned earlier, there's a couple of screws that we took out back there by the fans that were really hard to get to, and we didn't really realize that we weren't supposed to take them out because they essentially, and you can barely see there, that they have a little bit of a spacer that basically lets you slide the hooks of the radiator bracket right under there. So now we're going to clumsily put these back in, and then at that point we should just be able to slide the radiator bracket in and attach the two thumb screws. Hey, now that we have the water block and the radiator installed and they're not going anywhere, we're going to work on getting the wiring done and making it nice and pretty. It took us a few spins at it to figure out kind of the best way to route things around, and we ultimately ended up taking advantage of routing a lot of the fan wires back up under the motherboard and out through the rubber grommets to plug into the board that way. So you'll see me working through trying to figure out, well, how do I connect all these wires and how we're going to make them work to ultimately come up with a pretty clean mount. card we selected for this side of the build is the ASUS ROG STRIX RTX 2070 Super 08G Gaming GPU. It's a 2-slot card. It's a really long card as far as cards go, and it seems to fit no problem into the desk. Thanks for watching part 1 of our system build using the Lian DK-05F case. Please like and subscribe so you can see our future updates and see the rest of the system built and the whole thing put together, complete with a 49-inch Samsung monitor.